Direct from Foxborough, Massachusetts, the gem of Norfolk County, and taped at the studios of Foxborough Cable Access. It's Foxborough Central, and here's your host, Bob Hickey.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Foxborough Central. I am Bob Hickey, your host, and I want to thank you for taking the time to join with me and my guest as we talk about the people, events, and organizations that make Foxborough truly the gem of Norfolk County. Now, you hear me say those words all the time, but there's a person whom I've come to know over the past 25 years who's been so important to me, my family, our neighbor. He and his wife Marge were such important parts of my kids growing up. So when I talk to him, you'll have to forgive me because it's talking to an old friend, but of course he's so much more than that. Past editor of our Foxborough Reporter, award-winning journalist, town historian, and somebody that if you don't know him, then you've not been paying attention, but it's a great opportunity here to introduce him to you, my friend and our town historian, Jack Authelet, and accomplished author.
Thank you.
Accomplished author. You've written five books, and we're here today to talk about not necessarily your latest, but you've created an update to one of my favorite books of yours, Foxborough World War II, and this is the expanded second edition. Now, before we start talking, Jack, and thank you again for coming on the program. It's always a pleasure to have you here.
Usually pleasure to be here.
Well, usually we're always talking about something that you're doing for the community. This is more something talking about, really how you are educating us and keeping us in tune with the past so that we don't forget and always remember going forward. So that's why I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that you folks will take advantage. Jack is going to be at the Marilyn Robin Performing Arts Center on Friday, November 9th. Now, this night is going to be an author, how do we describe it?
Wow.
A symposium. He's going to be sharing. So this expanded edition, the second edition of Foxborough World War II, Jack, you're going to be speaking.
Well, yeah, there'll be a social hour and ample time for questions and answers, or discussion. But
well, I always love hearing you talk. And by the way, folks, this episode is going to be an opportunity for you to get a synopsis of what's in the book. So please, this is going to be fun for all of us. But before we do that, I just want to share that 6:30 is when we start. It's going to be a social hour. You get to talk and meet and greet. And then you're going to be presenting on the stage.
Well, it would give me an opportunity to expand on some of these stories. In other words, how they were developed, what traces of things we had to follow to bring all these pieces together. Some of these stories defied answers for decades. A man disappears. His plane never returns. When one case, it took over 5 decades to find out what happened to that plane. And yet, when we finally do, it's one of the most highly documented crashes ever, because we find eyewitnesses, we find survivors, and we find people who have been decorating the graves of those who died in that crash for many, many years. And it makes such a broad story, so much to be thankful for. And to realize the sacrifice of so many people, and yet to have a group like that, Flowers of Memory in France, decorating the graves of those at Normandy, because they believe that every day they live in freedom, they owe to the people buried there.
Mm-hmm. And I think that with this opportunity for you to present to a live audience, it's something that I hope people will take advantage of. And it's free admission, correct? And it's going to also give people an opportunity to purchase books and have them autographed and maybe personalized. So
Absolutely.
It's going to be a fun evening, and I hope you won't miss it. It's at the Marilyn Robin Performing Arts Center at 1 School Street here in Foxborough. No admission charge, and it starts at 6:30. And the presentation will start around 7:15, 7:30, and then we'll go from there. So, you know what? They didn't come to this program to listen to me. I'd really like to hear you tell us. And by the way, when you write, you do such a wonderful job of making the words come to life. So when you have an opportunity to explain and expound upon your written word, it's gold. So, Mr. Authelet, please.
Well, you know, when you get to some of these stories, they're not words, they're echoes of the heart. And to me, it is such a privilege to be at this place, at this time, to be someone who could bring all these things together. But right now, of course, the great focus is on the second expanded edition. But it was never the intent to just sit down and write a book. It's been a continual commitment since I started writing in the Reporter to write about local veterans of all conflicts, from the Revolution right on through, right up to every single conflict that any of our men and women have been involved in.
And of course, you served in the Korean conflict.
Absolutely, but it's just so important that people are able to read about these individuals and realize what they did for their country and what it means to us. And we benefit every day by their sacrifice. And we are a nation of the free because of the brave. And look at what they did in that first conflict, that Revolutionary War, that brought this bold experiment of a people's government into existence. And the rights and privileges extended to us in the formation of that new nation affect our lives today, every single day.
And of course, we're still learning how to be a democracy every single day, aren't we?
Yep. So it is such a privilege for me to be here for this reason right now.
So if I could just share the remind everybody, I'm speaking with our town historian, Jack Authelet, who is the author of Foxborough World War II, and this is the expanded second edition. You can also purchase copies if you can't make it to the Marilyn Robin Center on Friday, November 9th. You can buy them at Memorial Hall, at Cindy's Joy and Diamond Exchange here in Foxborough, and also at An Unlikely Story in Plainville, as well as at Amazon.com. But the Friday, November 9th is going to be a night not to be missed. This edition, the second edition expanded, how did we get here? There's more that you wanted to put in, and what have you just woke up and said, I forgot something, but it seems to be much more than that.
But actually, we were able to develop so many stories, and you eventually get to the point of saying, having it in the Reporter archives, having it on microfilm, that's fine, but it's not enough. It's got to be in a broader base, a broader availability. Mm-hmm. So at some point, it was meant to be that we put it in book form, but almost immediately, that is just going to stimulate more veterans being willing to come forward, and there would come the day when you would have to extend that again.
Okay.
And to me, it's such a privilege. But it's just been these decades of writing about veterans, and then we pull it out, and in one particular instance, well, just as all the Civil War features and things like that, but in this one particular book, we have to do it just a little bit different. But now, as those war clouds were sweeping across Europe in the late 1930s, yes, the Foxborough Company was involved making torpedo control devices for the British Admiralty, but no commitment to war had been made. But on that fateful day of December 7, 1941, when the news flashed around the world that United States forces in Pearl Harbor had been attacked. That was certainly a day that would live in infamy, as President Roosevelt said. I think any one of us who had the radio on that morning would remember the rest of our lives where we were, what we were doing, what we were thinking, and how that news hit us and what it meant, and just that shock.
You know, and for those of us who weren't alive back then, of course, the newspaper that we see on the screen now, of course, that's one that is in our memories, even for those of us who weren't there.
Yep. No, very, very quickly, the headlines would follow, but that first announcement went out on the radio, and within days, of course, the U.S. had declared war on Japan. Germany and Italy had declared war on the U.S., and there would be no turning back. Our fate was sealed. So it's just amazing that in this community of Foxborough, what that set in motion that day, and just over the next years, we have, just quickly, El Mazzella, a prisoner of the Japanese throughout the entire war until Allied troops actually entered Tokyo. Frank Carey, Amherst Professor of American History at Yoshisuka University, fluent in Japanese, got his family home in time, but he was interred during the war. But what a blessing he was to the other prisoners, because he could be the contact between the prisoners and the Japanese and the language barrier, and also then begin to interrogate Japanese prisoners for U.S. forces. And Bill Berlin, prisoner in Europe, kept a diary. Unbelievable record that he was able to keep smuggled all those years. But when Bill was finally released, he made it home before word got out that he was coming home. And there he was, after all those years, walked in the door at dinner time, asked if dinner was ready. George Lightbody, he had some photographic experience. He removed a camera from the body of a dead German officer, carried it with him. And when they went in to free the Bush-involved concentration camp, he took pictures. And he revealed to me for the first time that he had such things. And as it turned out, they were so graphic. There were only two that could be reproduced in a family newspaper, but that he would live that experience. Cliff Curry, on the ground from Normandy to Berlin. All of those days, weeks, months, years under military conditions, combat conditions. He disobeyed an order. And in spite of his years of service, all his stripes were finally gone. And he wore that like a badge of honor. Because the reason he was demoted, he broke a rule. After a particular hard-fought battle with many casualties, there was one body of one American left on the battlefield. But the conditions around that field were so tense, it was too dangerous. He was forbidden, and nobody was allowed to go back. He could not live with that. That night, he got a Jeep, stretched to it, went out and picked up that body and brought it back. Now, he did not obey orders, but rather than a full court-martial that would destroy his record forever, they decided on company punishment, so a demotion was the limit of his punishment. But he was so proud of that. Tom McKay, over 365 days, constant combat conditions, day after day. Never once did the stress of the battle lighten up. Don Middleton, he loved to ski. So he was lucky enough to get promoted into the ski corps, or the unit that was in Italy.
Okay.
And he had a challenge. The heaviest German artillery unit was on the top of a heavy, heavy top ridge. All efforts to neutralize that had failed. The only way they could attack that unit was up the face of that cliff. Every weapon they had, every amount of ammunition, all supplies, whatever, was only what they could carry up there with them. And they went up that cliff.
Wow.
And they were successful. But it reminded me of Pointe du Hoc, to the right of Normandy. German pillboxes were up there, and they could fire down, and all across the front of the Normandy front, they had to be reckoned with. And once again, a special unit of Rangers trained specifically to go up one face of one cliff. I stood there and looked, tried to imagine how they would cling to that rock to get up there. And then I drove around the edge to get to the point and sit in that German pillbox where they would have been looking out as those guys finally came up. And they were able to sustain that attack and shut down that base. I mean, it was just unbelievable. Paul McAuliffe served in the Pacific. He broke a rule, and it saved his life. The one cardinal rule of anyone in the infantry, you never take your boots off. But he'd been in the foxhole for days. They were soaking wet. His feet were killing him. Mm-hmm. He couldn't stand the pain. So once things quieted down that night, he slipped off his boots. A few minutes later, he felt something against the side of his foot. An enemy hand grenade had rolled down into his foxhole. He quickly threw it out. It exploded, but not in his foxhole. Things like this, to have somebody describe the tension of that night, of those German tanks coming up the road and their ability to force them back, and yet to then try to get some human comfort into that foxhole. Clinton Davison lost on a bombing run over Berlin. Not a word. Nothing. His body was finally discovered. He was moved to Normandy, but no details on what happened. 5 decades pass, and that mystery is now one of the most fully documented crashes, because we were able, after all those years, number one, to find a eyewitness. Number two, to find a survivor out in Wisconsin.
Really?
Who had never discussed the war with his family. But realizing the importance of getting some of these stories onto the public record, they had to come forward, and he did. Warren Hindenlang, their bombing group was the closest one to Tokyo. They had positioned themselves to be the first ones, once that day came, to make the run over the Japanese capital. But they had one mission over Chichijima, where their plane was hit. They crashed, only one survivor, George H.W. Bush. Nothing known of the others.
Wow.
The war was over. Remains removed, brought to Pearl Harbor. Took years for identification. That unit, subject of the book Flyboys by James Bradley, that unit was about to go into the Air Force Hall of Fame, but one of the flyers was statistically unidentifiable. It took a lot of doing, a lot of records. I was able to talk to people who had reason to believe that that unknown flyer was somebody they knew from an earlier life, Warren Hindenlang. One of the people that brought that to light his family had a summer cottage up at the Universalist camp up north, and so did the Hindenlangs. And this man had a close relationship with the family. In fact, when he was born, his parents named him Warren because of their respect for the Hindenlangs. And he was a trucker. He was on the road all the time and never read a newspaper. But he had a problem with his truck, and he had to stay overnight at a hotel. And they put a copy of USA Today under his door. So he read the newspaper. And there was a little story about this gentleman who got some war records released from the Army. And things started to identify the Chi-Chi team victims. The U.S. government suppressed those records for years for fear that if the people of the United States ever knew what happened to those men when they were taken prisoner, it would turn this entire country around against the rebuilding of Japan after the war. It was that bad. So here he is in the belief that that's going to be Warren Harding. Wow. So they get in touch. I contact the young lady that he dated before he went to college. I found his college roommate. I found other people he served with. And then I remembered, too, that when I interviewed Bob Conkey, he had said he came to Foxborough to start his swimming pool business because a man he served with in the war by the name of Warren Hindenlang had told him so many good things about Foxborough.
Really?
Can you believe it?
That's amazing.
So here we are.
I would just say, remind everybody that we're speaking with Jack Authelet, our town historian, author of Foxborough, World War II, the expanded second edition. I want to remind everybody that on Friday, November 9th, Jack will be at the Maryland Robin Performing Arts Center at 1 School Street, beginning at 6:30 for a social hour, and then a presentation will be on the stage. If you are intrigued or as entertained or as in the grasp, if you will, of your storytelling, then you'll want to be there. There'll also be an opportunity to purchase Foxborough World War II, the expanded second edition, and have an autographed copy for yourself. A great holiday gift coming up in the holidays, but also something that every family should have. You know, as you're talking about how much research you've done, and I know this sounds cliche, but you're all in on this book, and I suppose that brings up the next topic, which is how America, this was the last real war that America was all in on. This was all-encompassing, and no matter who you were part of World War II, no?
Well, that is the main point to me. I mean, World War II was the greatest military mobilization in the history of humankind. But as terrible as it was everybody's war. Every single human being had a role to play in this war. And while they're around the world fighting, we had the sale of war bonds and stamps here at home. We had rationing. So many people planted victory gardens. We had paper drives, scrap drives, visiting military hospitals. Volunteers even helped some of the patients at the state hospital to have victory gardens.
Really?
So they can feel part of it. Now, our just as a feel for the depth of all of this, our response to our 5th Warborn Drive, there was a large...
I believe people can see the picture on the screen now. So it's a large board that was on the common?
On the common, yep. And what they did in that particular drive was raise enough money to purchase a PT boat for the war. In later efforts, they would do another PT boat. They also purchased or raised enough money to cover the cost of 10 P-38 fighter planes. Oof. I mean, this is just an incredible record. They were over the top every single Warborn Drive that they were assigned. The children at school, if everybody had purchased bonds or stamps, their school got a special flag to fly. And they really felt so proud to be such a part of that effort. Paper drives. We went out as scouts on every paper drive and truly, truly felt we had just made an effort to help win the war. Cooking fat, they needed it. So every patriotic cook would have a can on the stove and cook something and save the fat. If we took the fat up to the First National, they would pay us 5 cents a pound. And usually a can of fat would give us a ticket to a movie and a candy bar that afternoon. So there was vested interest in
Speaking
that.
of the Marilyn Robbins Center. So.
But every single day we were reminded of the price of war as well. They had a marker on the common listing the number of men and women from Foxboro that were in the service, but also a gold star number for each one who had passed away. But it became obvious that at some point in time, the joy, the privilege of writing all these stories, it wasn't enough. They had to have greater distribution. So in 2003, I took all that we had up to date on that and put out the first edition of Foxborough World War I. And the publication of the book, number one, it was readily accepted and appreciated by the community, but it then encouraged some other veterans who had been hesitant to agree to being interviewed.
Sure.
I mean, I had men that I really had known them all of my life. I would approach them and get an absolute flat no. I will not revisit that chapter of my life again. Fortunately, a lot of them came to change their mind over time. So it gave us the satisfaction of having a public record now in the library and all the school libraries and available everywhere. But the stories would continue because there were still others out there who had not been interviewed. But we had to know the constant thought behind all of this. If they did not win that war over there in Europe, it was going to be fought here. Now you can imagine those nights in London, the bombs coming in every night, people having to run to the bomb shelter. The bomb shelters would get overflown. Can you imagine being encouraged to go down into the metro, into that subway station? And you see the people lined up on the tracks there, curved every which way, all squeezed in. That was the only way they felt that they could get through that night.
And the picture we see on the screen, of course, is just a small snippet, and it doesn't really show the true horror, because also when the bombings happen and the power goes out, you're really trapped underground. And if you can think about our own subway system, it's easy to realize, that's not a pleasant place to spend the night. And with all the terror going on above, it was something that nobody thankfully has to experience.
All that doubt and uncertainty.
Yeah.
Will I ever get back up those stairs? But
so we see this picture here. It's of the Begley family. Tell us about the Begleys.
well, once the first book was out, of course, the continuation of stories, and obviously there would have to be another edition someday.
There would have to be, yes.
But this wasn't, of course, something projected right at that time. It was just get out, get more stories, get updates on existing stories, search for answers to the situations where we knew so little about the people involved in the war. So as these stories began to build up, I was pressuring myself to do something book-wise because I wanted these stories out while they were still here to read it, while they were still share it with their families. And wonder of wonders, there were still some families and some veterans who had never appeared in print under any circumstances for all the years since that war. It was hard to believe. And one of them, the most obvious, was the Bagley family. They were a very, very prominent family in East Foxborough. Mom and dad, 5 sons and 3 daughters. They were the most musical people on earth. They had different instrumentalists and vocalists in town. They did a lot of work of that type. But when it came to the war, Dad was an air raid warden. Mom dealt with first aid projects and war bonds and stamps. Their son Frank, he was an armament manager on the USS Massachusetts, and had to keep all those guns working. James joined the service and was an engineering unit, building bridges, roadways, and supports for the troops all through Europe. All the bridges that got bombed out had to be replaced for the troops that were now coming through Europe on their way to Berlin. He also did a lot of work in mine searching and just trying to keep everybody on the move between Normandy and Berlin. Joe, he was a flight maintenance gunner. He manned a gun, but he also was a mechanic that if the plane developed difficulties in flight, he could probably fix it in the air. One of his sisters went to one of his reunions many, many years after the war. And as each veteran was introduced, she said Joe got the most applause of anybody because he not only manned his guns, he kept that darn plane flying so that they could get back to the base. Mac had flight experience, and he was definitely going to be in an air wing of some type. But again, filling a need. They asked him to join the company of gliders. Gliders. These are wooden structures, like building a balsa wood airplane is what I used to think. All light wood, fabric-covered wings and body, no armament, no weapons, nothing. It was made to have 12 men as a passenger. And you had a pilot and a co-pilot. And what they would do is they would have the men in the plane. The plane would take off, pulling that on a cable, get up in the air, and fly it to the scene of the battle. When they got in position, there were all these guys in the unit, had their parachutes. They would jump out of that glider. Or, in more cases, the glider would be cut loose. It was used 2 ways. Number 1, expand capacity of the flight, or number 2, cut it loose. It would play on the wind currents to come down.
Sure.
Now, you're landing behind enemy territory. You have no engine, no way to have that unit get you out of there. So you take off on foot into the countryside.
Assuming you land safely.
Join a unit, go to war on the ground, but then make your way back somehow to somebody who's going to give you a ride back to England and rejoin your unit. I had written quite a bit about them, but then before I was able to get up to book form, members of Mark's family, he had preserved a lot of records, did a lot of writing. They published a book about his experience in the glider form.
Really?
It was G stands for guts. And when they approached him, now here's this guy, heavy involved in air flight. Mm-hmm. But to try to convince him that he should go into a unit to fly in something that didn't even have an engine, they were trying to sound him out a bit. And he surprised them by saying, I'll fly a baby carriage as long as it had wings. So it was a little above the baby carriage level,
wow.
But he made his point. He would be up there. Now, their brother John, exempt from service, but he insisted that they let him join up, and he was assigned to northern Italy. Sisters in the family, Sister Louise, Agnes, and Marie, they were younger. They did their thing with bonbons and stamps at school and Red Cross programs. But their sister Marie entered the Concord Carmel Convent, mm-hmm. the first member of St. Mary's Church to go into the ministry. Wow. So the Bagleys were just this...
I was just going to say the Bagleys are a great example of America being all in. Lord. This family was absolutely all in. Reminder everybody that we're speaking with Jack Authelet, our town historian and author of Foxborough World War II, the expanded second edition. Jack is going to be appearing at the Marilyn Rodman Performing Arts Center at 1 School Street. You can check them out at www.orpheum.org or call them at 508-543-2787 to get more information. Jack, the Bagley family is amazing, but here's another family, and who would these be? Would these, my notes say the Marzio, but you have the story, I'm sure.
It's amazing, and you can repeat this over and over again. Alexander DiMarzio preferred to be called Joe. He was in a construction unit preparing bases for larger numbers of ships. In other words, all the bases they first built in the Pacific, they had no idea the volume of American ships and stuff that would eventually be using those same ports.
Sure.
So they had to do a lot of expansion work. He was getting ready on the island of Luzon for 68,000 troops to gather there for the assault eventually on Japan. Mm-hmm. But during all of this preparation, they were nearing the end of the war, and all of a sudden they had news of the dropping of the atomic weapon. His war was over. He was able to return home to his wife and their 13-month-old daughter, but he made an incredible contribution to the ability of the U.S. to build up its forces in the Pacific. Brother Bill was in the service since 1937, but after the war he joined the Merchant Marines. Noah Gio was only 17 when he enlisted. He was heading to Saipan in the Pacific when the bomb dropped and word was spread. He then was detailed to return 10,000 Japanese prisoners held by the Allies back to their homeland. He then received an assignment that I just can't imagine the joy of such an assignment. He went on a goodwill tour aboard the USS Midway. Okay. Now, the Midway was no ordinary boat. When it was built, it was the largest one. It's been eclipsed since then. But on this goodwill tour to visit the small African nations that had been caught up in the war, to reassure them that all was well, that everything would be okay, and the U.S. had not forgotten them. They were still aware of their needs. And while they were in Naples, they were able to hold a Christmas party for 200 little children.
Really?
Some of whom I'm sure never had a Christmas. He was also one of the observers for the Bikini Islands bomb test. And finally, he had done his duty. He could come home. His brother Roger, Norgio's twin, they took an island in preparation of, again, the attack. They needed to be closer to Tokyo. They took an island that still had a lot of native population living in the woodlands. And they would see them come down and try to take off their clothing and look like military members going through the chow lines. So they made specific provisions to feed them and give them care, just so that they wouldn't be out in the woods and starve to death. And he relished the assignments that he had, and it was time to bring troops back to the U.S. He didn't have enough time, to his credit, for him to come home, but he was able to bring 21 other U.S. servicemen home. Then he had to go back and pick up another load.
Wow. Wow.
But,
so that war continued. And then who is this young lady in the that we're seeing here?
the what?
Yolanda DiMarzio, I believe?
Oh, yes, his sister Yolanda, while all the boys were out to war, she joined the Cadet Nurse Corps.
Okay.
Now, I have to say that that's probably the best investment that American government ever made, to take these young ladies right out of high school. Give them the nurses training that they need. They worked hard. She was one of 7 from in the book. She is the only one who was a Foxborough native. When we're doing the research on the cadet nurses, number one, they all joined under their maiden name. There's no master list. And now they were out as nurses under their married names, most of them. It was very, very hard to trace, but of the ones who came to Foxborough and made such an impression working as school nurses and for different doctors and the medical center that started up in the center of town and then went down onto Grove Street.
The other piece of what I think Yolanda might represent also is just a seismic shift in the role of women in the American society as they took over the roles, forming of the WASPs, the women's air patrol, and ferrying aircraft to Europe and to the war theaters, taking over the manufacturing jobs, taking over the roles traditionally done by the men, and then what that in turn did is it brought several steps forward women's rights and their role. And at the war's conclusion, nobody went back to the kitchen. It was a big change in how we function as a country. So when you say all in, the country's not only all in physically and emotionally, but also from a development standpoint. So much happened.
But those cadet nurses taking their role in the hospitals freed other more experienced nurses for the battle hospitals around the world and things like that.
Now we have here a picture of, it says in my notes, Frank and John Barrows, perhaps?
Well, Frank and John, yes. Now, talk about the American dream. Frank Barrows was a native of Portugal. He was a barber by trade.
Okay.
He came to this country seeking the American dream. Now, he came here, he had worked as a barber, had a wife, but he left her behind in 1943 and he joined the military. Now, his country of Portugal had remained neutral in the war.
Mm-hmm.
Here he was, in his adopted country, fighting that war, and Portugal was sympathetic to the Union cause. Now, the military needed electricians. So they see in this barber the possibility of making him an electrician, and they send him to training for the New York Trade Show. In October of 24, fully qualified, he was shipped to England in preparation for going to war. His brother John was already in England and had participated in the D-Day invasion of France. Frank's unit came over 2 days after D-Day and headed inland to build bridges and roads and recondition airfields that had been all bombed up, paving the way to Berlin. And he was credited with a level of excellence in his work in the engineering course. Now, as the war wound down, he had an opportunity to link up with his brother John.
Mm-hmm.
When they met, he realized his brother John had been promoted to sergeant and outranked him. But they did a lot of touring, and then, of course, initially, when you finish up in Europe, you worry, do you have enough points to go home, or are you going to be sent to the Pacific?
Sure.
But again, before they had a chance to finish up there, the war was over. And they came home, and Frank Barrows then started an electric company.
Yes.
Now, if you can believe this, here we are, post-war building boom. Foxborough doubled in population. Veterans were building and purchasing homes in record numbers.
Okay.
And one of the best electricians they could possibly hire was fellow veteran. And John went back to the Foxborough company, but he turned out to be one of the most vociferous sports fans of Foxborough High School athletics of any person on the face of the earth. He was there at every event and cheering all those students on. But also we finally got answers over time to the mystery of Clinton Davison's flight. We also got the answers to Warren Hindenlang's flight. And we were able to bring those stories to fruition. It's interesting, when I got all the pieces together, and on Warren Hindenlang's, the body had been brought to Hawaii, identified, returned to the family for burial in the family lot, but no information came with it. When I finally got that all put together, I ran it in the Foxborough Reporter.
Okay.
That particular week, that story ran. There was a man who had been a friend of the Hindenlang family, had actually carried the ashes of Warren Hindenlang when they buried him in the family plot. But then moved around the country, kind of lost touch with the family, had come back here to be close to his family. And one Thursday, he just got the urge. He said, I'm going to spin down into Foxborough, see what's going on, see if I can reconnect.
Sure.
He got downtown. They were working on some roads and painting crosswalks, and everything was a mess. He said, I want no part of this. He ran in the news store, grabbed a reporter, jumped in the car, and went back home. Now, what he didn't know was that particular week, the Foxborough Reporter was just a little late getting to the newsstand. So he ran in and grabbed a week-old newspaper.
Okay.
And that is the one that had the Warren Harding story in it.
No.
If the paper had been on time, he still would have known nothing.
Wow.
Nothing about that.
Isn't
But
that
it's that
wild?
type of coincidence that has been all through this. Some of the things that we did to pull some of these stories together, and just like Clinton Davison as well. I honestly believe that there are some stories that are destined to be told, and it's going to defy all odds that it's going to happen. And I say, thank you,
Well,
that I could be the one.
I was just going to say, we thank you for being the one to be able to do this level of research and to be able to put these notes and investigations and research and records all into a story that we can not only hear but embrace and understand and really want to hear more. And if you want to hear more, you'll surely be coming out to the Orpheum Theater, the Marilyn Rodman Performing Arts Center. I mentioned the Orpheum because they also, Mr. Perry was part of the War Bond Drive, as were all the leaders in this community. And there are pictures that we have in the lobby there showing the War Bond, the drive going on, and so this will be a very, very compelling night. We hope to see you there. It's on Friday, November 9th. It'll be beginning at 6:30 p.m. It'll be a social hour. You get to meet Jack, talk about history, about maybe your history, your experience, or what you remember from your ancestors here in Foxborough, as we then hear Jack give a presentation about Foxborough, World War II. It's the expanded second edition. This is a new book, and it's one that you'll be able to purchase at the theater that night and get a personalized autograph. It's going to be a special night, Jack, and I cannot wait. As always, we're out of time, but I want to give you the last word, sir, please.
Well, I just want to make it so clear how privileged I feel that I was able to do something like this, so that the war contribution of those men and women is a permanent record. Generations of people from now can come back and read what the greatest generation did when their nation called.
Only because you're here to tell the story, and it's a very important story to tell. We can't wait to hear more about it on Friday, November 9th. If you want more information, you can log on to www.orpheum.org, or you can call their box office at 508-543-ARTS. That's 543-2787. Jack's books are for sale also at Memorial Hall. They're open Wednesday evenings and Saturday mornings here in Foxborough, also at Cindy's Jewelry Shop, our neighbors here at Foxborough Cable Access on Central Street. We are so out of time. I wish we could talk more, but we will see you, I hope, on Friday, November 9th at the theater as we listen to Jack Authelet tell us more about Foxborough, World War II, the expanded second edition. On behalf of all of us here at Foxborough Cable Access, I'm Bob Hickey. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.